Welcome to the Ridgecrest podcast. This is where we take time to discuss various issues impacting our church, community, and culture. My name is Matt. I'm the executive and discipleship pastor here at Ridgecrest, and with me as always is our senior pastor, Michael Estes.
Good to see you today. There will be no discussing issues of any sort today. Well, this is going to be a little bit different.
It is going to be different. And I think if we were to drop it in one of the categories, it would probably be it really is.
It doesn't have a category.
It has some issues of all three. I mean,
you're right. Yeah.
Really.
We'll talk about church. We'll talk about church history today. We'll talk about the community around us, sort of. We'll talk about the culture. All these things will be.
Yeah, that's right. So for those of you who did not see our last podcast where we introduced what we were going to be doing on this podcast, this is our first ever. I won't say annual because we may not do this annually. We'll see.
The amount of prep work that went into this.
It was a lot. It was
more than I anticipated.
Yeah.
I got really into it.
Yeah, and to be honest, I could have put another 10, 15 hours in easy. Yeah. On it. Yeah. Just a lot of prep work to try to understand. So what we are going to do today is we are going to have a draft of significant people throughout church history and Christian history, because not all of our people are church people.
Yeah.
And we are going to draft a church staff. We have a total of 50 names that we're going to be drafting from. And of those 50 names, we'll do a snake draft here in a minute. We'll flip a coin to see who gets first pick, and then we'll just work through. And I think what we're going to do is draft all the way through, and we'll draft basically two people for each position.
Yep.
So that way you kind of have your starter and your backup in the event of injury or anything like that.
You're going to have the two people that are left over. Yeah.
Yeah. Because in church work there are injuries.
There are injuries.
And
emotionally, injury, you got all kinds of injuries.
So we'll do that. It'll be a lot of fun, and it'll give us a chance to talk through some church history. I do want to preface by saying, again, we have a list of 50 names. Yeah. And this, of course, there's a whole lot more people out there than 50 people in church history, and so we
may have already gotten criticism for leaving some people off.
We may have, and so I want to, just give that disclaimer that just because they're not on this list does not mean they're not significant. It doesn't even mean that some of those people may have gotten drafted ahead of some of these individuals. Sure. It's just we knew we had to keep it.
And if you want to criticize anybody, you can criticize me. I came up with the list. I came up with the 50 names, and some of the names I put on here for fun, and some of the names I put on here seriously, and I'll let you decide which is which.
Yeah, because some are obscure. Yeah. Where I even had to do some research on one or two of them that the name was familiar, but I just could not remember anything about them.
By the way, by listening to this, you will find out a lot about our personal tastes too.
I think so.
My guess is we'll have some differing opinions on who we would draft in particular positions. Yeah, and that'll tell you a lot about our personal preferences.
Yeah, that's
whether or not we would do this in a real church setting.
That's right.
Because that's another thing. We don't have just Southern Baptists on here. We have a bunch of different types of people on here.
Sure.
Anglicans, Catholics, Methodists. We got people from all across the spectrum in Christian history.
That's right. And so that's another good point to bring up is as we work through this, we aren't drafting these individuals as Southern Baptist pastors.
Though that would be interesting in some cases.
That would be. We're not, doctrine probably will play a part in some of those, and some of the roles they get. But, again, this is for fun. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm excited to see how this kind of, rolls through, and, we'll see. So
I need to talk about my coffee mug today.
Yeah.
And I have a prop that goes along with it. So, but these are actually both, so it's a Dunder Mifflin mug, my favorite paper company. For those who aren't familiar, this is our cultural part of our discussion today. For those who aren't familiar, the Dunder Mifflin is a reference to the sitcom The Office. So, show that I'm really into for a long time, and then I got so into it that my coworkers at school, we would do Secret Santa in the English department every year, and 2 years in a row I got office gifts. So the first year I got this Dunder Mifflin mug, and the second year I got this Dundee. For those who aren't familiar with the show, the boss would have an award show for his employees, and I got the Fine Work Award. So for all the fine work I do.
Yeah.
So
at least it wasn't smelliest bowel movement.
Yeah, sorry, Kevin. So don't go in there after me award.
That's right.
And we lost everybody.
Yeah, maybe not everybody.
All right, if you've made it this far,
Yeah, it is time.
it is time.
It is time.
The way we're going to kick this thing off is Steven's going to flip a coin for us. Steven is going to comment throughout the show on. He's going to provide analysis, in-depth analysis of our draft picks.
And I have a mic now, and if this sounds bad, I'm sorry. I just plugged this thing up.
He has no idea who's on the list. I don't think he's seen the list. And so I don't know how in-depth his actual analysis is going to be. It's probably going to be poking fun at us more than anything else.
That's my plan.
So he's going to flip a coin, and I'm going to let Matt call heads or tails.
Oh, how nice.
I know. Mostly because whenever I call heads or tails, I usually lose. And so I'm hoping for a win here.
Okay.
The way the draft is going to work, for those who aren't familiar with a snake draft, what that means is whoever drafts first in a round will draft last in the next round. So if Matt wins the toss, he'll draft first in the first round, I'll draft second, and then I'll draft first in the second round, and he'll draft second, and we'll work our way through like
So essentially, once you get going, you kind of have two picks back to back.
Yes.
Since there's just two of us.
Yep.
So, which is good.
Yeah.
So, all right. So I'll call it in the air. Steven, I'll let you flip it.
Okay.
Tails.
Heads.
Yes.
All right. So Michael gets to come in with the first pick.
All right. So I've got a draft board that I'm going to fill in as we go. This will be Matt here. So
yeah, I liked how you're an M over there for Michael. I was curious to know what you were going to do on this side for me.
I couldn't write M for Matt. I've got to be thinking through things a little bit more carefully than that. All right. So I had to make a decision. If I got the first pick, am I going to draft positionally the first pick, or am I going to draft a person that I really want with my first pick? And I decided to draft a person with my first pick.
Okay.
And you probably know who this person is.
Probably.
It's going to be C.S. Lewis. Yeah. And I'm drafting C.S. Lewis as my children's minister.
But he didn't like kids.
He did like kids,
did
actually.
He?
Oh, yeah. So, all right. So, a little background. One, he wrote Narnia.
That's right.
Children's books.
That's right.
You could create an entire children's curriculum on the Narnia series.
That's right.
Okay, so I could see themed rooms that he helps us design and stuff like that, and the kids kind of work their way through it as they get older. So you've got that. You can work with that, and I know he liked kids because when Julie and I went to Oxford, one of the things we did was we visited his house, and they still have the house. They have people that intern there as a part of the C.S. Lewis Institute.
Yeah.
And you could kind of tour the house. Well, one of the things that they had there was a room that was set apart for children that were during the war were displaced and from London. And he actually had some children that had come and stayed there, and that's kind of where he got the idea for the wardrobe. He got idea for the kids going and being displaced during the war, and so he kind of got things started there. He would regularly write letters in response to children that would write to him, and so there is that common myth out there that
he said it right. Isn't there a quote out there where he said that something along that's his greatest weakness is that he doesn't like kids or something like that?
I don't recall that. I read a lot of what he's written, and anyways, So first pick of the draft, C.S. Lewis, children's pastor.
Yeah, and I have no faults with that pick. That's a good pick, and because I was the same way where I had him on my draft board as a children's person, but then when I saw that quote, it concerned me. I was like, well, because like you said, all the history, he did a lot of really good things for kids. And of course, we had Narnia, that is by far the best. But
can you imagine that curriculum?
That'd be fantastic.
The rooms would look
half
amazing.
Our rooms were already set up like that at one point.
They were kind of set up that way. What's great about it is given the success of Narnia, the fact that it was written in a particular time period. You're talking about the 50s and 60s, and we still talk about it today. That tells you that it ages well.
Yeah,
it's a curriculum that you're not going to have to replace often, and so I feel good about it. I feel great about this first pick. All right, who's your first pick? First round.
If I had the first pick,
second overall.
So I was kind of in the same kind of boat where if I had first pick, I was really wrestling. I actually had 3 choices.
Oh, wow.
Do I go with kind of a person?
Yep.
Do I go with position? Or do I draft C.S. Lewis so Michael can't?
I had a feeling that was a part of what played into my thinking is like, I got to get him off the board before Matt tries to steal it from me.
That was definitely part of my strategy. And so if I had first pick, I probably would have drafted C.S. Lewis. Even though, to be honest, I didn't have him very high. I mean, he was probably my second choice. I'm trying to remember exactly where I had him in a couple places, but yeah.
Yeah, I may have completely destroyed my entire draft because I wanted to pick him more than anything else.
Just to kind of give a little bit more commentary on C.S. Lewis, I actually had him as my discipleship.
Yeah,
because
I think it's great.
You see all the letters he wrote, prayers, he and the group that's what they did was discipled each other. And you have Tolkien who discipled him, and so that's probably where I would have had him.
I probably would put him as a student pastor.
That I don't see. I don't see him like jiving with teenagers very well.
The only reason is because I feel like he does such a good job at presenting his faith in a way that disputes doubt, and I feel like teenagers have a lot of those questions, and I feel like he has an approach that kind of counteracts that.
That's fair. I can't wait to get to student pastor.
I have a couple of good ones there too.
Hey, shout out to Stacy though. Children's pastor was my first pick.
Yeah, that's right.
So, all right.
And so along those lines, I think I'm going to go children as well.
Okay.
Just because children, to be honest, of all our names, there's not a lot of depth there.
Yeah, I agree. It was hard to know.
And so with there not being a whole lot of depth there, I think I'm going to go ahead and go with a children preschool person as well. And for mine, I'm coming out a similar time period as C.S. Lewis, and I'm going with Corrie ten Boom.
Nice.
Because she, of course, did a whole lot of really good stuff, during a very tumultuous time in our history. And I was thinking, let me try to get to my notes.
Gotta get to the notes.
There we go. So of course she this was something I didn't know till I started doing some more research on her, but she was actually the first woman licensed watchmaker in Holland.
Oh wow, cool.
I had no idea. Yeah. So she'll be teaching her kids how to make watches, and they'll be very nice. But she actually she was one I actually considered even youth ministry, because she established this youth club, for girls and young girls. And so that's kind of what I was like, well, I think she would do a great job with kids. And, of course she protected Jews during the attacks of Nazi Germany. She was arrested by Germans.
She went to a concentration camp.
She spent time in the Ravensbrück. Concentration camp. And then later she established a rehab for concentration camp survivors, as well as those who had even cooperated with Nazi Germany. And so really she was one that I could see.
She could have been Pastoral Care. She was actually one of my picks for Pastoral Care.
Yeah. She would have been very good at Pastoral Care. And so, but I was thinking, and the reason I ended up landing with her as children was because I was like, this life that she lived, and all these things she, if she could instill those values in our elementary age kids, preparing them going into, high school and things like that, I mean, that would be, you'd have a significant group of individuals.
Yeah, definitely. It's a good pick for a first rounder. I did not expect her to go first round.
Yeah.
And
if I didn't have her for children, she probably wouldn't have been my first round pick.
Yeah.
But again, like I said, children was kind of shallow. You'd already taken one that was kind of there, so I was like, I better go ahead and So,
all right. So, second round, first pick. Who you going with?
Yep. So now
you got to start thinking about whether you want to fill what positions do you want to fill, who you want to go with. You want to draft best person on the board.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go same strategy as before, where I'm going to go somewhere where there's not a lot of depth.
Okay.
And because I've got a lot of names in some of the other places, and even if some of them slip by, I've still got, because they're, to be honest, there's a couple of draft boards where like my top choice for that.
Yeah.
I mean, your top two are pretty equal kind of deal.
That's right.
So I'm going, this is an interesting position to go second round
what we got?
With. Going stewardship.
Okay.
And I'm going with Constantine.
Nice.
Constantine.
So we need some depth. Who is Constantine?
Yeah.
And why would you pick this person?
That's right. So Constantine was emperor in Rome.
Yep.
And he was the first Roman emperor to profess Christianity.
Yeah.
So there
the whole
was a
story
lot
about that's just so fascinating.
Very interesting, and so you had some of the council of Nicaea that he was involved in, all sorts of things that, a lot of things really happened there. So as far as spiritual side of things, I mean, it was very significant to Christian history,
yes.
Specifically in Europe. But the reason I picked him for stewardship is because whenever he became emperor, the financial state of the Roman Empire had kind of waned, and it wasn't as strong as it had been. And so one of the things he did is he actually reformed the monetary system, and basically with the aim of restoring stability. Yeah. And if I'm not mistaken, I think he even part of that reforming the monetary system was creating a new coin and building value and some things there. And like I said, the specifics there, I'm not 100% certain on, but that's where I went. So I went Constantine for stewardship.
Yeah, great pick. For those who don't know his conversion story, they were about to go into battle, and he has this vision of the cross.
Yeah.
Right before they go into battle, and he actually has his soldiers baptized as they cross a river, and then I think they end up painting crosses on all of their shields, and they end up winning the battle. And so he took that as like God speaking to him, and it was a very interesting story generally. But all right, I decided to be completely selfish and go lead pastor next.
Okay.
I picked a guy that we're talking about ancient history, he was originally known as John of Antioch. He gets a nickname. That's an awesome nickname. If I was going to have a nickname as a pastor, I would want it. It's John Chrysostom. If you don't know what that means, it means John Goldenmouth. And how great of a nickname is that for a pastor?
Yeah.
Our guy here, he lived. Let me see. Let me look at my notes here. He lived 354, 430, so really close to the time of Constantine.
Yep.
No, sorry, that was Augustine. Chrysostom was a little bit earlier. Yeah, 347 to 407. So he was a contemporary of Augustine. Nicknamed Goldenmouth. He was deacon and priest in Antioch. Eventually becomes bishop of Constantinople, and he didn't want to be the bishop of Constantinople. They kind of forced him to be that.
Yep.
Basically, when he was younger, he becomes a monk. He lives out in the desert. He actually is so tough on his body that he has to quit being a monk. And he goes from there to the priesthood. But while he was a monk, he basically memorized the vast majority of the Bible. And what that meant was anytime he started to preach, he could quote very specifically from different parts of the Bible and preach extemporaneously on a regular basis. And so the way somebody commented on his life, it said this: it would be a great thing to attain a stature, but it would be hard. Nevertheless, even the following of him is lovely and magnificent. And I thought that was a pretty high praise when it comes to type of person he was. He wasn't just somebody who was a good preacher. He was very open in his criticism of different aspects of Roman culture, willing to take a stand against certain things, and so in particular the theater. He didn't have a high view of the theater. Of course, the Roman theater was pretty terrible. So John of Antioch, John Chrysostom is my lead pastor. I have the golden mouth preaching
Yep.
every Sunday. Should be great.
Yep. And he was my first pick as senior pastor as well.
Nice.
So you stole one from me.
Yep. All right. And I get to pick again.
Yeah.
And so I decided again that now this pick is both personal and there's a priority here. My next most important position when it comes to church staff would be discipleship. And because that's my next most important pick, I picked a person that indirectly discipled me. By indirectly, I mean that he's dead. He's been dead for a long time. Most of these people have.
That's right.
And it was a book that he wrote that had a huge impact on my life. The name of the book is Pinces, which means this guy's French. It's the only Frenchman I have on my list. I'm not a huge fan of the French. For our French listeners out there, I'm sorry, I apologize, but it's Blaise Pascal.
Yeah.
So French mathematician, also a strike against him, you would think. I mean, I'm not a big fan of math, and yet he wrote these. Basically, Pinces was a bunch of thoughts that he had that he never got a chance to organize because he died at a young age, and he only lived about 40 years. He died at the age of 39. He lived 1623, 1662, and created modern calculus. Actually, had a working model of a calculator. Created maybe the first vacuum. Guy was a genius.
Yep.
But took his faith very seriously, and what he did is he would write down these thoughts that were kind of like apologetic thoughts, and by apologetic I mean like he's kind of thinking through how to defend the faith in the culture that he lives in, how to put the faith in context of the culture that we live in, and so much of his thought has discipled my mind that I was like, I would really want him to be my discipleship pastor.
Yeah.
And so that's who I picked as my discipleship pastor. That's why I picked him. So Blaise Pascal is my discipleship pastor.
I had him as my executive pastor.
Nice.
And because of the diverse background that he has, right, and he was actually my first pick. That's actually where I was going next.
Yeah.
So you really stole that one from me.
Nice.
Because he was definitely gonna be my next pick.
If you need a minute to think, did we ever say what the positions are at the
No,
top?
no, we didn't.
We didn't.
So we can go ahead and get a
Yeah.
refresher of that.
So we're gonna be we're 12 positions, right? And so we have senior pastor, executive pastor, discipleship pastor, pastoral care, worship, connections, children, preschool, students, senior adults, domestic missions, international missions, and stewardship.
Yes. All right, so round 3, second pick.
Yeah.
I have so far chosen C.S. Lewis as my children's pastor, John Chrysostom as my lead pastor, Blaise Pascal as my discipleship pastor. Matt has chosen Corey ten Boom as his children's pastor, Constantine as a stewardship person, and then for his third pick, he's going.
I bought you some time, Matt. You didn't.
I know. I think I'm going to go ahead, since I've got two back to back. There's one I know was going to be one of these two. I'm going to go. I think I'm going to go John of the Cross for pastoral care.
Nice.
So
who is John of the Cross?
So this was an individual who lived in 1500s. He had this kind of relationship with struggle and suffering. He believed that it was necessary for spiritual growth. Of course, he spent time in prison. He wrote poems while he was there. He really had this desire to fully know God and love God and abandon anything that affected that kind of communion with him. And a quote I actually have of his, it says, "The soul that is quick to turn to speaking and conversing is slow to turn to God." And I think that sums up someone you would want in pastoral care, that is going to be able to, recognize suffering, understand that it is a part of life, and be able to walk through that and listen rather than just being quick to speak, and some things like that. So that's kind of where I went with him.
All right. I think it's a great choice. He wrote a book that spoke to how we as Christians walk through difficult periods of life, called The Dark Night of the Soul, and it was very influential in my life when I was going through a period of struggling with anxiety and depression, and it helped me frame up that part of my life. So I agree that Pastoral Care would be a good spot for him.
Yeah. And of course, he was also one that I considered for discipleship as well, but given that side of things, and, I think I went there. So for my next pick for discipleship, I'm going to go with John Wesley.
John Wesley.
Of course, he's the one who essentially accidentally created the Methodist Church.
Yeah.
He vowed to lead a holy life, take communion. He visited prisons, within society. At the time, he was very skeptical and cautious of the emotional preaching that was, kind of becoming a thing at that point in time, because he lived in the 1700s. And so he was a little skeptical of that because he didn't like this idea of it being an emotional response to the gospel.
Yeah.
And so I like that. He actually started small groups that met in homes, and then ultimately these groups began to grow to where they didn't fit in these homes any longer. And so then he divides them up into these kind of 11-person classes, and through all this process,
that's your jam right there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was fantastic. And I got another quote of his. It says, "Do all the good you can, by all the means you can, in all the ways you can, in all the places you can, at all the times you can, to all the people you can, as long as ever you can."
I like that. That's good.
And so I think that's my guy, who I think would do a tremendous job at leading a disciple-making ministry.
All right. I went next with connections. So my connections pastor. This was. I wanted to make sure I got these folks because, and it's a team. Because their ministry still exists today. So this is William and Catherine Booth.
Yeah.
And some of you may be familiar with the names William and Catherine Booth. That is the founders of the Salvation Army. So William, when he was a young man, he was a pawnbroker apprentice. He worked for a pawnbroker, and he saw a bunch of poverty and the effects of poverty in people's lives, and what it made some of them do. People stealing other people's stuff or pawning off stuff that was valuable to them because they needed to pay for something or whatever. And so he saw all that, and he was like, he vowed to do something about it, but he really didn't know what to do. He was like apparently a very fiery teenager. He was 14 at the time when he was working for this pawnbroker. At the age of 15, he was at church, and he heard this sermon. He got converted, and all of a sudden just became like this very fiery preacher. And one time he was preaching at a church that Catherine attended, and she fell in love with him. They got married at a fairly young age, and they just decided they were going to do something about what they saw around them. And so they got super invested in the community, and they founded the Salvation Army. And the Salvation Army, of course, is not something that just stayed where they were in England. They were based in England.
That's right.
But we see Salvation Army all over the world now, and they basically wanted to share the gospel with everybody that they could wherever they had opportunity, and so that was my connections pastor. Did you have them on your list?
I did. I had them with Pastoral Care.
Yeah. And that would have been a good choice as well because, like I said, they did a lot to serve people around them. And then for my next choice, I went executive pastor, and I chose William Wilberforce.
Okay.
William Wilberforce was a guy. If you've ever seen the movie Amazing Grace, it's all about him. a British parliamentarian. He for years fought against the practice of slave trading in the UK, and he was instrumental in bringing it to an end. Him and an African named Equiano, they worked together to bring an end to the slave trade in the UK. But he didn't just do that. He founded the Free Colony of Sierra Leone. He founded the Church Mission Society, and he also founded the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. So, like, he was an organizer. He was a guy that liked to do things that put things in place. He was a mover and shaker. He got things done, and so that's why I picked William Wilberforce as my executive pastor.
Yeah, that's a good one. He was. I had him on my list for connections, because of the being able to introduce the bills and things that brought slavery to an end in England. But I think executive pastor it was a great place for him as well.
All right, 10th pick.
All right, I'm going to go executive pastor for this one, and I'm going to go William Gladstone.
Nice pick,
William Gladstone. Who served as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom on 4 different occasions. This was in the 1800s. He had a very strong religious sense and believed that his this religion or relationship with God was an integral part of his political and social policies. A quote I saw from someone, I can't remember exactly who said it, said that no politician of the 19th century ever matched Gladstone's ability to mobilize the nation behind a program. And so when I think of, being executive pastor, being able to, put those pieces into place and being able to say, here's where we need to go and this is how we're going to get there, I think he would do a fantastic job, and he's Scottish, and
that's always good. Got a good accent.
Yeah, that's right.
So he makes announcements. It's going to be awesome.
That's right. So
people will be confused.
Absolutely. All right. Next pick. Let's see here. All right. Next pick is in.
Okay.
I'm going to go students.
Okay.
And I'm going to go with Francis Schaefer.
Nice.
Francis Schaefer. He was an individual who, of course, defended the inerrancy of Scripture. He was, led to kind of a spiritual renewal that led to a deeper reliance on Holy Spirit and prayer, which was just kind of an interesting, thing that he kind of went through, because he kind of asked, I believe he asked his wife, said, what if we took the Holy Spirit and prayer out of the Bible? Would it still have significance? And he realized the need to depend on that more so. He spent time focusing on sanctification. I think he's another discipleship guy, who understood this process of sanctification. And he actually served, as one quote, I saw someone, the way they described it as Schaefer served as a prophet of cultural engagement during an age of rebellion among America's youth, and he shaped the thinking of an entire generation of theologically minded Christian young people. And so when I saw someone give him that credential, I was like, who else would you want kind of leading your youth but someone who can really walk through cultural engagement, how it applies your faith, and that being rooted in reliance on the Holy Spirit and prayer.
And what's awesome is you already have a student retreat area. He had L'Abri, which
right.
was over in the Swiss Alps. So, like, you've got your retreat already set up every single year. You just show up, and there he is.
That's right.
So, all right. So I'm up again.
That's right.
I'm going to go worship pastor.
Okay.
And I chose John Newton as my worship pastor. So I have a couple things that I think about when I think about worship pastors. One, can you sing? Hopefully that's the case.
Yeah.
Two, are you able to create music on your own?
Yeah.
Can you write music? Can you do that sort of thing? Well, John Newton, I don't know if he can sing, but he could definitely write write hymns. He
Yeah.
wrote Amazing Grace. I mean, come on.
That's right.
It's the Southern Baptist anthem.
Yeah.
So
That's right.
we have the guy that wrote the Southern Baptist anthem. And the third thing that I think about, and Greg, this is for you. As the worship pastor, you got to be somebody that can tell a good story. Like you got to preach the pre-sermon. You know what I'm talking about? Like Greg will every now and then start kind of warm everybody up.
So you're saying Greg can do this?
He does it already.
Okay,
so
I wanted to...
I'm just legitimizing
Yeah.
what he already does.
Yes.
And John Newton had a fascinating life because he actually, when he was younger, he was on a boat and the Royal Navy impressed him into service. And so they forced him to become a part of the Navy. Okay. So he's on this boat. He tries to get off the boat, gets punished in front of 350 other sailors, gets stripped naked and whipped.
Yeah.
Thinks about murdering the captain, and then jumping off the boat and ending it all. Then later on, he gets captured by this slave trading boat, gets made a slave for a while, and then eventually becomes a slave trader himself.
Yeah.
Totally crazy life. And then he gets saved on a boat that's in the middle of a storm off the Irish coast. So he would have so many great stories to tell, I think. And I think you've got to be a good storyteller to be a good worship pastor. If you've ever been to a worship concert, that's one of the things that happens a lot at a worship concert. The guy is there singing, and then all of a sudden we have the time where he's just kind of strumming along just a little bit, nice, giving some ambient music, and it's story time. And so I think John Newton would be good at that.
Yeah.
So he's my worship pastor, and then after worship pastor, I went with student. Okay. And so student ministry, I was torn.
Okay.
Because I wanted somebody that would be effective in getting the attention of students. That's a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
If you've ever been in student ministry, you've got to have a good bit of energy and life and a kind of a charismatic spirit to you.
Yeah.
And so I had two choices here. Okay. I'm going to go with the one that's more practical, though it would have been really funny to see my second choice, and he may still make it as backup. So my first choice, though, was Dwight Moody.
Okay.
Dwight L. Moody. He was an American evangelist, lived 1837 to 1899. Incredibly effective communicator, to the point that he went over to England for a while, preached some revivals there, had 4,000 to 5,000 people at almost every one of the sermons that he preached, and then he came back to the States and would regularly fill up places with 10 to 20,000 people. So the dude could communicate.
Yeah.
And one of the things I liked about his style is he didn't have this really high theological style where he's using really fancy language, stuff like that. He actually, one of the things that he would do on a regular basis, he would use this thing called the Wordless Book. And he did it especially for people who were illiterate. Not that I'm calling our students illiterate. But it basically, if you've ever seen the bracelets that have the different colors of green, black, red, gold, all those colors, it was that book. It was a book that had different colors in it, and he kind of walked through, this is what those colors mean, and this is how you come to know Jesus, and thousands of people got saved as a result of his ministry. So I picked him because he was charismatic, good communicator, communicated on a level that people could understand. So that's my choice for student pastor, was Dwight L. Moody.
Yeah, that's a good one. Because he grew up being heavily involved in the YMCA, and ended up leading that and doing some things there, and so that makes sense. Okay.
Who was your second pick, or is that not pertinent?
He didn't want to share it yet in case.
Oh yeah, in case I want him to still be on the board potentially.
Okay.
All right. So I'm gonna go connections.
Okay.
And this is actually one that I did not have on my original connections list. But I think he would do a great job in this role. I'm going William Tyndale.
Okay.
And of course, most commonly we're going to know of Tyndale because of the Tyndale Bible. He translated that from Greek, and was actually criticized for it by England at the time, and later whenever England was developing the King James Version, they were like, maybe we should go back and look at this William Tyndale's work. Even though at the time he was criticized for it, but so he translated both New and Old Testament from the original languages. He could speak 7 languages.
That's impressive.
Yeah, and he also wrote tracts. He wrote books. He visited refugees. He ministered to the poor. He dined in merchants' homes. Where he would go along. Eventually, he was strangled to death and set on fire as a heretic.
Yeah, didn't end up good for him in that way.
No, and that's really what
ended his connections.
Made me not have him on my original connections board, was because he never could quite get the government on board with what he was doing. But whenever he was, again, he could speak 7 languages, so that means he's going to be able to connect a lot of different people to one another. Him spending time with refugees, ministering to the poor, dining with merchants. And so that's where I'm going with connections.
Interesting about him, he's the first guy on our list that's kind of coming from the Reformation time period. He's kind of the reformer before the reformers. He kind of sets things up for the reformers.
Yeah.
Like one of the names I didn't put on this list that could have been on there for a non-church, like non-specifically church reason was Gutenberg. So you had Tyndale coming up with like a vernacular form of the Bible, and then you have Gutenberg comes along with the printing press, and those two things kind of combine to make the Reformation happen. But anyways, I think it's interesting that Tyndale's the first one off the board that was a part of our Reformation list. We have several people that are a part of the Reformation that
I'm surprised that not more of the Reformation people have went yet.
They'll eventually make it.
Oh yeah, for sure. All right.
So, we're on pick 15.
That's right. I'm trying to determine if I want to go worship or senior pastor.
Man, senior pastor hadn't even been picked yet.
I know.
I'm hurt.
And I'll tell you why. Because we have a list of a lot of really good people, and there's a lot of depth there, and even so much as like we haven't even gotten into missions yet. We've got a lot of missions people on here. That there's some missions people that I'm like, okay, well, if these, you already took my number 1 pick for senior pastor.
Yeah.
So once he was off the board,
it's like I can
wait because I can there's, because there's some mission people that like, man, if you had that missions guy, senior pastor of a church, there's a lot of help there. So that's why I haven't went there yet, and I need to do a little bit more, continue my reading to see who I might want to move over there. And so in my worship, I'm torn between 2 individuals. Both of these individuals kind of pushed the boundary a little bit. Mm-hmm. Both, looked at, ways where they, they weren't necessarily just the norm. They looked to use music to connect to different people. And so, man, they were both around, basically same time. They were contemporaries of each other. Mm-hmm. And man, this is tough. I think I'm going to go. I think I'm going to go Isaac Watts.
All right.
I'm going to go Isaac Watts.
That was my number 2 for worship. All right, why Isaac Watts?
Well, of course, we know him as hymn writer. He was theologian.
Wrote some great hymns.
Wrote some great hymns. But he was criticized by a lot of people because his hymns were often viewed as that they weren't connected to Scripture enough.
Which is crazy.
That's right.
Because if you listen to his hymns, I mean,
it's all doctrine.
Yeah.
And again, he was, a theologian.
Joy to the world.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was one of the ones that most people were criticizing because they were like, how in the world does joy to the world actually come from Psalm? I'm drawing a blank on which Psalm it is, but they were like, that's just not connected enough. But but I like that because I think thinking of a guy in our culture today, he would push the boundaries a little bit where but he would still be rooted in that. He would still be rooted theologically. And so that's kind of why I ended up going there. A quote of his: "Order my footsteps by thy word, and make my heart sincere. Let sin have no dominion, Lord, but keep my conscience clear." I think that's a beautiful example of his writing. And I think, like I said, I think he would be one who, even in modern day, he would write some hymns and songs and things that, others might say, well, hold on, is that still, but when you really look into it, you see that it's nothing but theologically sound.
Funny story about him. His father was getting on to him because he wouldn't close his eyes when he would pray. And he responded with, "A little mouse for want of stairs ran up the rope to say its prayers." And his dad didn't like that response and began to punish him. And he said, "Oh, Father, Father, pity take, and I will no more verses make." And I was like, I like this guy.
Yeah. But that's another great example of him kind of pushing the boundary a little bit.
Absolutely.
And, and kind of, so I like him.
All right. I'm going to go with my two missions pastors next.
Okay.
So I'm going to go domestic first.
Okay.
And that tells you a little bit about, I am obviously a fan of all missions.
Sure.
I think that based on, Acts 1:8, we should work out in concentric circles. So we start with our Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and then to the ends of the earth. And so, there's a working out there. So I'm going to go with my domestic domestic missions pastor first, and I'm going to choose Justin Martyr. Now, Justin Martyr lived right at the beginning, the birth of the church. We're talking about 100 to 165 A.D. Wrote a book called The First Apology. It was a book that helped set Christianity in the context of the Roman Empire. And so what was happening was Romans were making accusations against the Christians for all kinds of things, calling them atheists, saying that they ate and drank flesh and blood, and they were making all these accusations. And what he did is he spent time explaining what was actually happening here. The denial of, the atheism he answered was like, listen, we believe in one God, and that's the maker of all things, and his son Jesus Christ as Savior. We don't see the Roman emperor as a legitimate God. We don't see the other gods that are a part of the Roman pantheon as gods. We're not atheists in the sense that you're talking about. We still believe in a God. It's just not the ones that you worship. And then he talked a little bit about early Christian practices. And so he was very effective in helping Christians within the Roman Empire reach Romans.
Yeah.
That was his goal. So he was my choice for domestic.
He was my number one for domestic as well.
Yeah. And then my number one choice for an international missions pastor was Hudson Taylor.
Okay.
Hudson Taylor lived 1832, 1905. He was a missionary to China. He learned, before he went to China, he took it upon himself to learn medicine so he could minister in a very specific way to the people that he would go and try to reach. He learned Mandarin before he got there. That was something that was fairly new, is to try to learn the language as thoroughly as possible before you go. But what was interesting is one of the things that he got a lot of pushback for is he decided to adopt Chinese dress and hairstyles. Yeah. And people did not like that. People thought that you're an Englishman, you need to dress like an Englishman, you need to look like an Englishman, and he was trying to contextualize the gospel, which I think is essential for somebody that's going to step into an international setting. You don't bring an English version of Christianity into China. You help them see how Christianity is a part, how their Chinese culture can fit into Christianity. Yeah, and so that was what he did. He worked on translating the Bible into Chinese. He got sick and had to go back home, and while he was home, he learned how to be a midwife, which I thought was fascinating. For those who think that a midwife is always a female, midwifery is basically the practice of helping people deliver babies. And so, like, again, trying to find a really practical way to serve the communities that he would be going into. And he founded the China Inland Mission, the CIM, and was responsible for eventually hundreds of missionaries being in the interior part of China, which was the harder part to reach. China had allowed the English in particular to be able to come into their port towns and stuff like that and sell opium and all kinds of stuff. That was before we really knew what opium was.
Yeah.
And so he made inroads into the interior part of China. That was his calling. And so that's why I chose Hudson Taylor as my international missions.
Yeah, Hudson Taylor was one who really had a significant impact on my spiritual development, because he was, studying him was the first time that, 1 Corinthians 9:19 really clicked with me of, I become all things to all people, because I saw the picture of him sitting among, other Chinese individuals, and I mean, eventually you can pick him out, but at first glance, you can't, because he literally looks like that culture.
That's awesome.
And I loved him as an international missions guy. I think that's really good.
All right, you got 2 picks in a row. What you got?
Yeah. All right, so I think I'm going to go. I'm going to make a pretty significant audible here.
Ooh.
And I'm going to go senior pastor.
Yeah. Who we got?
But it's going to be someone that I guarantee is a shocker.
Will be a fan favorite?
I don't know that'll be a fan favorite, but I think he could be if you sat under him and he mobilized a generation.
Here we go.
I'm going to go William Carey.
Wow, okay.
I'm going to go William Carey.
He would be most people's pick for missions.
That's right, and that's who I had on missions, and so of course he had a passion for international missions.
Yep.
Actually, on my original draft board, I actually had him above Hudson Taylor because Hudson Taylor actually was motivated to go on missions a lot, of what William Carey established and kind of set forth. He organized a mission society. He specifically spent 41 years in India, but most importantly, he inspired many other missionaries that would follow. And so that's why I'm making the audible of moving him to senior pastor, because, he's a guy who spent 41 years without sabbatical. That was something else. It's like, he was there 41 years without taking a sabbatical from India, as a missionary. Now, and if you have this guy who, of course, ended up leading and motivating many others to follow in his footsteps and go into missions, I think I want him as my senior pastor because he's able to speak into that and really inspire. Yeah. And then now all of a sudden you have a group, a church that is being completely sent out, and you have all these Hudson Taylors going out into the world.
Yeah, he's a good example of, like, one of the things that I think a lot of people look for in church leaders is, can they bring about explosive growth? And I think, obviously it's not a terrible thing that kind of growth happens, as long as it's healthy. But, like, there's something to be said about faithfulness for years and years and years.
That's right.
He only saw about 700 converts. That's an estimate.
Yep, that's right.
And you would think to yourself, like, that was that what we would call successful ministry? But like you said, there's all these not unintended, but like unseen consequences of his ministry that still exist today. The fact we know his name today, tells you a lot about,
that's right,
like the impact he had on the missions movement. He is the father of the modern missions movement. I mean, he's the one who made it happen. So,
That's right.
All right, so that's your lead, Pastor. Interesting choice.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah.
Okay, next pick.
So since I disrupted my, missions board, I'll tell you what, I'll go ahead and go domestic missions.
Okay.
I think, I was kind of torn here as well after Justin Martyr, because as I mentioned, he was my number one. I was torn between a couple of individuals, because both of these individuals are, did a lot of great work. But I think I'm going to land with St. Francis.
Okay. He was on my list.
St. Francis, he embraced a life of poverty.
Mm-hmm.
He, of course, ended up establishing the Franciscan order. And one of the quotes I saw that described him as, he literally carried out Christ's work Christ's way. He had an evangelical zeal. He had a consecration to poverty, charity, personal charisma. And so I see him as a guy who, again, domestically, locally, would really, minister, and again, here, even in Jackson, we have a very impoverished area just south of us. Mm-hmm. We have an impoverished area just north of us in Canton. And so I think, he would do wonders, in that culture. Quote of his I have here, it says, "Start by doing what's necessary, then do what's possible, and suddenly you are doing the impossible." Yeah. So that's where I went with that.
Nice. All right, I'm gonna go senior adult next.
Okay.
And this is going to be a fan favorite. Like, if our senior adults are listening to this, they're gonna love the choice that I made. And you probably know who it is. It's Billy Graham.
Yeah, of course.
I got Billy Graham as my senior adult pastor. American evangelist, lived 2018, just passed away a few years ago. Led the Crusades. I mean, just massive success as far as just reaching so many people. A tremendous communicator, and I think our senior adults would absolutely love him. Would wear a suit and tie every single Sunday, and man, they would get, like, his preaching alone. Like, they're the teenager events. Man, we would blow up.
Packed
Madison.
house.
Yep.
Packed house every time.
Well, I mean, all the senior adults would end up here.
Yep.
So that's my senior adult pastor, and I feel really good about that pick. I can't believe it was still available. Then after that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go Pastoral Care. I wasn't planning on waiting this long for Pastoral Care, but I thought this person would be available.
Yeah.
And the reason I picked this person is because of the amount of difficult. I think one of the things that somebody that's involved in pastoral care has to be able to do is they have to empathize well. That means that they probably have to have experienced a good number of things in their life, and kind of a tremendous amount of difficulty helps in some ways when it comes to pastoral care. And so I picked Johnny Erickson Tata. For those who don't know who she is, she was born in 1949. She's still alive. She's one of the ones on our list that's still alive today. We have several on our list that are contemporary people that are still alive today. She's an author, radio host, artist, founder of Johnny and Friends, which was a ministry that focuses on the disabled community. And the reason that she started this ministry is when she was a young lady, she was diving into the Chesapeake Bay, misjudged the depth of the water, and fractured some vertebrae in her neck, and it led to her being a quadriplegic. And she writes very openly about that experience and how difficult it was. She's written, I think, 40 books. And done a tremendous amount of work in reaching people and loving people that are going through difficult times. She organizes her organization, Johnny and Friends, does things like called family retreats that are specifically for families with disabled children. Or disabled family members. She does Wounded Warrior getaways. She does a program called Wheels for the World, which is specifically geared toward people that are confined to wheelchairs. And so I think she would be fantastic in the role of caring for people in a very pastoral way. So Johnny Erickson Tata is my Pastoral Care pastor.
Yeah, that's a very solid pick there.
All right, so you should have two positions left to fill.
International missions and senior adults. And so I'm going to fill both of those positions now because it is my pick, right?
You've got two in a row. Yep.
So for international missions, I'm going to go David Livingstone.
Nice. He was on my list.
So he's similar to Hudson Taylor. Also studied medicine to prepare specifically for missions. He studied Greek, Hebrew. He ended up serving the interior of Africa for 15 years.
Yep.
He ended up earning a gold medal from the British Royal Geographical Society for kind of discovering, or being the first European to see the Lake Ngami. I'm not sure the pronunciation on that.
Yeah.
And he used his missionary efforts to subvert the slave trade in an effort to kind of permit and allow for legitimate commerce to take place. And so that was kind of his thing. Is he, it was, I think, is a great example of what an international missionary could look like, where you go in to a culture with a purpose, but you're using, because he was an explorer, right? And so he was going into the interior of Africa, but he was using that avenue to, reach a people.
Yeah. Great pick. All right. And so you have international, now you have senior adults.
Yeah, senior adults. And let me look.
I took the best one.
To make sure that was a really good one. And to be honest, I didn't have that on my list as far as a senior adult pastor.
Man,
that
feels so good about that pick. That may have been my best pick of my first group.
That was a good one. Trying to find my notes on. All right, I think for senior adults, I'm going to go with Andrew Murray. Andrew Murray. He, of course, was from South Africa. He
awesome accent.
Spent 60 years of ministry, in the Dutch Reformed Church. At times, he was actually accused by the Reformed individuals for teaching free will and that God was a redemption from all. So you kind of see that he was in that middle ground area where he kind of got criticized from both sides. His overall ministry could be characterized by humility, which I think
he wrote a book called Humility.
That's right. And so when I think of working with senior adults, I think that is a key piece of that. Because it is just such a service to them and to really care for them. Because I almost went like really pastoral care side of senior adult ministry with him. And I do have a quote of his. This is: "A dead Christ I must do everything for. A living Christ does everything for me." And so he's a very humble individual. Again, he spent 60 years in ministry, so he's someone who's going to be able to relate very well to those senior adults. So I'm going Andrew Murray as my senior adult.
Nice. So you stole. Okay, so I have one position left. It's stewardship for my first group, my starters.
Yeah.
And you stole my guy, William Gladstone.
Okay. In
that position. Huge fan of William Gladstone. Disappointed that he's off the board, and I can't choose him. And so I have to think carefully about who I want to pick here. there aren't a lot of great names for stewardship.
No, that's why I went early.
So, and that was a good choice, I think. So I'm going to go. He's not a specifically a money stewardship guy, but somebody who is an organizer, somebody who is a kind of a systematizer, who would do well with handling, I think, numbers, politics, the kind of the machinations of running a budget and that sort of thing. A guy named Thomas Cranmer. So kind of the leader of the English Reformation, served under Henry VIII, and wrote the prayer book for Anglicans called the Book of Common Prayer.
Yep.
Still used today. It's been edited and redone a bunch of times. And so I think he would make a good stewardship guy. And he's going to be my pick, mostly because there's not a whole lot of choices left. I don't know who my second stewardship guy is going to be, but I think he would make a good choice as far as stewardship goes because he is very systematic in his thinking and a good organizer. And so lived 1489 to 1556. So that's my choice for stewardship.
Yeah, I had him as a pastoral care guy.
He was actually on my list as executive, but that was one of my choices for executive pastor.
Yeah.
So I'm making that. I think executive and stewardship has some overlap.
It does. It does.
You know this.
I picked William Gladstone as my executive guy,
pastor.
and that's who you had as your stewardship. So there are pieces of that.
Yep.
All right, so we have now. We both have our first choice, our starters for all of our positions.
That's right.
So now we're getting ready to get into kind of our second round, or your second.
Our backups. Our guys that we need on the bench.
That's
that
right.
are going to help us out if there's injury.
That's right. So before we do that, I think now's a good time to kind of take a break, and we'll come back. Regroup, and then we'll come back with part 2, and we'll draft the second half, and then we'll kind of see where it all lands. And one thing I think, I don't know that I mentioned before, is there's a total of 50 names, and we'll be drafting 48. So there's 2 people who will not get drafted. So we'll get to see that next time. But, as always, we appreciate you listening. I hope you've had some fun hearing about some of these people, maybe learning some things about some people in church history and continuing to walk through that. And this next half, I assure you there's going to be some people that you have the opportunity to learn about as well. So, as always, if you have any questions, like to continue the conversation we're having here, on our podcast, and, let us know how poorly we drafted. Reach out. Let us know. But otherwise, we hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next time with part 2.